Hello friends, it's Kirsty. Today we are going to be making a Halloween costume. So let's go over the materials. For the top of this costume we have a viscose rayon. I have a cotton twill for the skirt and the belt. A few extras, we have some burgundy bias binding, some black tulle ruffle trim, horsehair braid for the bottom of the skirt, black and orange invisible zippers, and 2 gold buttons and 2 golden brooches. Here I've jumped ahead and draped the pattern I want, so I've got all my sections here. The bust, gathered detail, which looks really good, just ruffled and pinned into place, and the front and side pieces of the bodice, and I have my back piece with the back dart and the back strap. With all those, I traced it onto paper and cut my fabric out. Here's my back piece all cut out on the fold, and I'm marking the darts as well. Cutting out the small pieces that are the front side piece and the front piece. Front piece is cut on the fold. Here is the strap piece for the front. Here is the center front bust gathered area, and that's cut on the fold too. I have my fabric on the floor and I'm cutting out a circle skirt, so here is half of the circle skirt. I'll be cutting this twice to make a full circle skirt. I'll link a resource of what I used to calculate my circle skirt with my measurements. So here's my center front piece. I'm going to sew along the edges and attach my front side pieces, placing them right sides together. I have my front bust piece, and I'm going to sew a basting stitch, which is just long stitches across the bottom edge. So we need to gather all this fabric into the front of the top. And I'm pinning this right sides together, matching the sides and the center front, making sure that all the gathers are nice and even and neat. So I've got a lot of ruffles along the center, and then as it gets to the sides to my armhole, there isn't any gathers there. We need to do the same for the top edge, and here I have gathered it all up and tested it on my mannequin to see how it looks. With that all gathered, I've made another for the lining, and I'm putting that right sides together, and I'm going to sew across this top edge. I've already pinned the dart in the back piece of the top. So sewing those darts in place, starting at the base and tapering off at the top. And now I am adding my front strap piece to the back strap piece. And again, I made a lining for the back piece too. So I'm just going to be pinning this right sides together along the neckline of the back piece and then onto the straps, and we'll be sewing these together. When I get to that corner, I'm just going to put my needle down, pivot, and then continue stitching. I'm opening up both the front and back pieces of the top, and I want to sew my front strap to the front piece of the shirt. This is the back with the shell and the lining, and this is the front. I'm connecting the back and front now, so connecting these front straps to the front of the top, and I've opened out the front piece, so there's the shell and the lining. Done the same with the back, so this is the shell and the lining, and I've just tacked this in place so the strap will be attached to the armhole, and once that's sewn, when we close everything up, it'll be really nice and neatly attached. Every seam will sort of be enclosed. Kind of like that, and then the back will be like that. If that makes sense. Gathering wasn't enough and it's gaping a lot, so I actually inserted a piece of elastic between the lining and the shell along the front neckline, and that sort of gathered it up a bit more. Now I am sewing the side seams together, and I'm doing this by lining up the shell pieces and the lining pieces, so I have 2 seams to sew to close up that side seam. And here's what it looks like, all nice and closed on both sides. And I've left an opening here for the zip. I just have a regular puff sleeve pattern that I found in my stash. So here I have sewn the underarm seam, and I've overlocked the edge, and with that I have stitched a basting stitch around the top of the sleeve cap, leaving the underarm area not stitched so they won't be gathered, and I want to gather this up into the armhole of the bodice. Before we do that, I am hemming the bottom of the sleeve. I've tacked my sleeve in place into the right armhole. As I'm looking at it, the right armhole. This one is fully enclosed. I've tacked it to the shell of the blouse and left the lining open, so then I can sort of finish off the inside seam of the armhole just by folding it down one and then hand sewing it over top of the sleeve seam. I'm trying to make an effort to enclose most of the seams on the inside. I just sewed up the top of that side seam about a centimeter or so, so I could fit the sleeve into that armhole, and then I've got a gap to insert my zipper. And I'm sewing that down on the shell only. Once both sides are sewn up, I'm taking my lining and folding it over to enclose the zip. So hopefully we'll achieve that enclosed zipper. And I'm going to sew again across and trying to get as close to the zipper tape as possible. So here's what it looks like. I couldn't quite reach the top, so I'll just place a couple of hand stitches there to neaten that out. Based across the bottom edge of the sleeve about 2.5 inches or so from the bottom, so we can gather that up. Once those stitches are in place, I'm pulling on the bobbin thread and gathering that up until I like the fit. Moving on to the skirt, I have my two pieces here, and I'm going to sew up one side all together and then leave a gap for my zipper and sew up the bottom edge. I went ahead and pinned my waistband to the top edge, which was about 2.5 inches wide, and I'm going to sew those right sides together. I'm also adding a waistband facing, so I'm going to sew that onto the waistband, so when that's sewn I can fold it over and in, and that'll create a nice finish. Once I've done that, I am understitching that seam. The seam allowance will go onto the facing. I'm sewing my zip on the one side first, just hand tacked it down so it's easier to get as close to the zip tape as possible. And I've also stopped the zip where it actually stops right at the top of the waistband on the outer side, so that when we fold this in, we can use the waistband to hide and fold over the zip. So we're going to sew down here and then match up on the other side when we sew the other side of the zipper tape, and then eventually just cut that down to size, the zip, and sew a couple of stitches across the tape to secure it. Once my zipper is in place, I can now fold my waistband facing over top of the zipper, pin that in place. Now I'm folding up the seam of the waistband that we attached to the skirt, and I'm going to pin my facing along this seam, and I've also turned my facing edge in by 1 centimeter, so that'll be a nice finish when I hand stitch that down. I always find that hand stitching works better for me, as I can get quite detailed with it. Now I am adjusting the hem of the skirt. I've got some horsehair braid that I am sewing right sides together onto the skirt, and I'm slightly stretching it as I stitch. Now I'm on the inside of the skirt. I've turned the horsehair braid to the inside, and I'm stitching it down again along the top edge of the horsehair braid. Got some sparkly black tulle that I've gathered up, stitching it along the hem as well. I'm sort of doing it parallel to that last stitch to secure the horsehair braid, so I've got 2 rows of stitches. I'm trying to get that nice and parallel, so it looks really neat. Back to the top, didn't really know how to finish off the hem of it, so I just folded the shell and lining in by about 1 centimeter to each other, pin that together, and I'm just going to hand stitch that opening closed along the bottom edge, and that way we don't have any raw seams in sight. I've cracked on with the belt last night. I didn't do any recording on this because, similar to the top, being that I followed the same style lines, but I added about 2 centimeters to the bottom and 1 centimeter to the top, so it would come down a bit further than the top, and just to make sure it covers this panel. So I made 2 layers of this pattern, so the lining and the shell. Then I sewed it all together along the center front and along the top edge. I sewed down 1 line of stitching about 1 centimeter away, and then also in the actual seam itself, so sort of like stitching into the ditch to make the channels. Then I fed through my boning, making sure it all fits inside, and then I turned up the bottom edge of this by about 1 centimeter and hand stitched that closed, and I think that turned out pretty good. I also forgot that I put a channel of boning right that center front so it won't bend. I actually found this trim that I could use, hand sew it to the back and then have these hoops coming out, which I think might work actually. Here I am adding the burgundy trim along the sleeves, and I've done it on the neckline as well. And I'm just sewing that down with my machine, and this is also going to secure all the ruffles that we made at the bottom of the sleeve. I've added a little golden button. It's a close-up of the trim across the neckline of the bodice. I just attached this as you do with a double fold bias. Here I have a little brooch that I pinned to the center front, and I've also hooked this little star chain onto it. The brooch also matches the one on the witch hat as well, which I think is pretty cute. I've hand sewn some white lace onto the center front and laced it up as well. Just a quick close-up of the bottom of the skirt, and with that, here is the final look. I'm super chuffed with how this turned out. All of it really was drafted by me, which is really satisfying to say, and I'm really happy that it's gone well. I hope you enjoyed looking into the process when I draft and make my own costumes. I hope you are well, and I hope you have an amazing Halloween. Alright, see you later. Take care. Bye.